There are figures whose names are rarely mentioned in public chronicles, but whose hands hold the levers of power. Ivan Alexandrovich Serov was the first chairman of the KGB, a hero of Soviet special operations, and a participant in key events under Stalin and Khrushchev. His biography attracts the attention not only of historians, but also of those interested in the power side of authority. The shadow of Stalin and Khrushchev is a journalistic formula, but the facts of his life confirm that he was a man capable of influencing the fate of entire peoples and countries. Ivan Serov was born on the 25th of August, 1905. His place of birth is listed as the village of Afimskoye in the Kadnikovsky district of the Vologda province. It was a harsh, forested region where peasant labor required extraordinary endurance. The Serov family was not wealthy, like most in the area, and the future of young Ivan seemed to be predetermined by the plow and harrow. However, the revolutionary turmoil that swept across the country changed the trajectory of many destinies, including his. In the evenings, the torches in the village often went out, and the elders' conversations revolved around the harvest and taxes, but young Ivan was already looking beyond the neighborhood. He understood early on that the new government valued diligence and the right social background. Joining the Komsomol, then the party, became for him not just an ideological choice, but the only available way to climb the social ladder and escape the hardships of peasant life. Serov received a fundamental education for that time and environment. He graduated from the Frunze Military Academy of the Red Army, Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. Studying at the academy in the 1930s was a unique experience. Cadets not only studied tactics and strategy, but were also constantly under the close scrutiny of special departments. The atmosphere of general suspicion and purges of the command staff shaped the character of the future Chekist. He learned to be inconspicuous but effective, to speak little but to the point. His graduation from the academy coincided with large-scale personnel changes in the security forces. The old guard was leaving, often against their will, and the system needed new people, young, ideologically flawless, and unconnected with the opposition of previous years. In 1939, Ivan Serov was transferred to the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs of the USSR. Imagine this moment. Yesterday's academy student, accustomed to army maps and regulations, suddenly finds himself in the corridors of the Lubyanka. Here, the smell is not of gunpowder and mahorka, but of dusty, carpeted corridors, expensive tobacco, and, barely perceptible, fear. Serov enters the chief's office and adjusts his sword belt. He does not need to be told twice. An order is an order. From this moment on, his rapid rise begins. Yesterday's soldier puts on the cornflower blue cap of the State Security Department. It was not just a transfer within the service, it was a transition to another caste, endowed with special powers and special responsibility to the party. The career springboard worked instantly. Already in 1939, the 34-year-old Ivan Serov was appointed People's Commissar of Internal Affairs of the Ukrainian SSR. It was an appointment of enormous importance. Ukraine was a breadbasket, an industrial center, and, more importantly, a border republic with a complex internal situation. It was in Kiev that a fateful meeting took place. Serov met Nikita Khrushchev, who at that time held the post of First Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. Between these two men, seemingly different in temperament, the expressive populist Khrushchev and the dry executive Serov, a strong partnership developed. Khrushchev needed a reliable strongman who could implement any directives from Moscow without asking questions. Serov, in turn, found a powerful political patron in Nikita Sergeyevich. The autumn of 1939 became the first serious test for the new People's Commissar. After the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Red Army entered the territory of Western Ukraine, which had previously been part of Poland. The NKVD was tasked with Sovietizing these regions as quickly as possible, suppressing any resistance and integrating them into the structure of the USSR. Chaos reigned in Lviv during those days. Soviet tanks, refugee carts, and confused townspeople mingled on the cobblestones of the old city. In the offices that had belonged to the Polish administration just yesterday, the lights now burned all night long. Ivan Serov personally coordinated the work of the task forces. Lists of unreliable elements were quickly compiled. They included Polish officers, officials, landowners, representatives of the intelligentsia, and members of Ukrainian nationalist organizations. The scale of the operations was staggering. These were not isolated arrests, but mass filtration measures. Thousands of people were loaded onto trains and sent east. Serov reported the figures to Moscow, and these figures satisfied the leadership. He proved himself to be a tough administrator, capable of organizing the logistics of repression on a regional scale. In documents from that time, his signature often appears next to Khrushchev's. They worked closely together, clearing the new territories of potentially hostile elements, preparing the ground for the complete establishment of Soviet power. This experience of pacification and cleansing of territories would become Serov's calling card for many years to come. When the Great Patriotic War began, the tasks of the state security organs changed, becoming even more severe. The front required not only weapons, but also total control over the rear. The country's leadership was convinced that some peoples living on the territory of the USSR could pose a threat by collaborating with the advancing enemy. A political decision was made to deport entire ethnic groups. Ivan Serov, who had already proven himself to be an effective organizer of mass movements of people in Western Ukraine, became one of the key executors of these decisions. His experience proved to be in demand in 1943 and 1944 in the North Caucasus. Operation Chechnya, aimed at evicting Chechens and Ingush, was prepared in the strictest secrecy. Serov personally arrived in Grozny. The official version for the population, and even for the local authorities, was that the troops had arrived for rest and tactical exercises in the mountainous terrain. Soldiers were quartered in villages, established contacts with local residents, and sometimes even helped with household chores. Imagine the cold morning of the 23rd of February, 1944. Snow lies in the mountains. People gather in the villages to celebrate Red Army Day. The men are invited to a meeting where a decree of deportation is suddenly announced. The barrels of the automatic weapons of yesterday's guests are now aimed at their hosts. Minimal time was given for preparations. Serov was in charge of this gigantic mechanism. It was necessary to coordinate the actions of tens of thousands of NKVD employees and internal troops to ensure the delivery of thousands of freight cars and to organize security and convoys. The logistics were extremely complex. Mountain roads, winter conditions, hundreds of thousands of people to be relocated. Any delay or failure would be seen as a failure in Moscow. But there were almost no failures. The trains left one after another. Old people, women and children traveled in freight cars that were not suitable for transporting people in winter. Serov regularly sent coded messages to Beria and Stalin, reporting on the progress of the operation, the number of people loaded onto the trains, and the weapons seized. The tone of his reports was businesslike and statistical. Behind the dry figures lay the tragedy of hundreds of thousands of people deprived of their homes and sent into the unknown steppes of Kazakhstan and Central Asia. The methods developed in Ukraine, surprise, isolation of leaders, harsh suppression of resistance, use of rail transport as the main tool, were applied here on an even larger scale. In addition to the Chechens and Ingush, deportations of Karachais, Kalmyks, Crimean Tatars, and other peoples were carried out under Serov's leadership or with his participation. For Ivan Serov, this was work, the fulfillment of a state task of particular importance. He personally visited the sites, checked the posts, and reprimanded his subordinates for insufficient diligence. His Wallace rattled along the mountain serpentines, and the appearance of the general's papaka hat made the local officers stand to attention. As a result of these operations, vast territories were depopulated in a matter of days. Simple utensils remained in the deserted houses, and unmilked cattle mooed in the yards. And new routes for special settlers appeared on the NKVD maps. Ivan Serov was nominated for high government awards for the successful implementation of the operation to evict the peoples of the North Caucasus. The award certificate stated, "For the successful completion of special government tasks." During the war years, his responsibilities expanded to incredible limits. When the enemy was advancing on Moscow in the autumn of 1941, panic in the capital reached its peak. On the 16th of October, the day that would later be called the Great Escape, when it seemed that the city was about to fall, Serov was one of those figures who remained at his post with icy calm. His task was not only to maintain order, but also to prepare for the worst-case scenario. The Special Five he led received instructions that would make many people's blood run cold. To mine everything. The metro, bridges, factories, government buildings, the Bolshoi theater, everything that could be of value to the enemy was to be blown up. Lists of targets were drawn up and explosives were laid. Serov personally checked the readiness of the demolition teams stationed at key points. Moscow was to fall to Hitler in ruins or not at all. This fact clearly illustrates the level of trust placed in him by the top leadership and his own willingness to carry out orders of any degree of cruelty and destructiveness. As the front receded westward, Serov's tasks changed. Now he was responsible for the security of the rear of the advancing Red Army. This meant not only fighting spies and saboteurs, but also clearing the liberated territories of anti-Soviet elements. In Belarus and Poland, his department worked closely with the Smersh Front counterintelligence. Behind the front line remained not only defeated German units, but also detachments of the Home Army in Poland, Ukrainian nationalists, and Lithuanian Forest Brothers. All of them were considered enemies. Serov organized military operations to eliminate them. It was a brutal, invisible war in the forests and farmsteads, where prisoners were often not taken. When Soviet troops entered Germany, a new front opened up for Serov. He was appointed NKVD representative for the First Belarusian Front, commanded by Marshal Zhukov. Their relationship was complex and professional. Zhukov was responsible for military operations, while Serov was responsible for everything else. He was in charge of filtration camps for liberated Soviet prisoners of war and Ostarbeiters, forced laborers. The fate of these people was decided quickly. After interrogation, some were sent to verification battalions at the front, others to gulag camps on suspicion of treason. The capture of Berlin was Serov's moment of glory. He was one of those who entered Hitler's bunker shortly after its fall. He was interested not so much in souvenirs as in documents, archives of the Reich Chancellery, the Gestapo, and the Abwehr. He personally supervised the search for and interrogation of high-ranking Nazis who found themselves in the Soviet occupation zone. In post-war Germany, he became deputy commander of the Soviet military administration, effectively responsible for creating a new civil authority loyal to Moscow. But there was another, even more secret mission. Stalin needed not only territory, but also technology. Serov led a veritable hunt for German scientific secrets. Special NKVD task forces combed through the scientific institutes, laboratories, and factories of the Third Reich. The rocket program was of particular interest. The Americans had already taken Werner von Braun away. Serov was tasked with finding the remaining specialists. His people managed to find and persuade a group of engineers led by Helmut Grettrup, one of von Braun's top deputies, to move to the USSR. Hundreds of German scientists, engineers, and technicians, along with their families and equipment, were carefully packed up and sent to the Soviet Union. They were settled in closed sharashkas, specialized research institutes, and provided with everything they needed. It was their knowledge and experience that formed the basis of the Soviet rocket program, which 12 years later would launch the first satellite into orbit. Serov, a peasant's son, stood at the origins of the Soviet space program, obtaining brains for it using the methods of the secret services. After Stalin's death in March 1953, a desperate struggle began in the upper echelons of power. Serov, as deputy to the all-powerful Beria, found himself in a risky position. However, as always, he made the right bet. When Khrushchev, Malenkov, and Bulganin decided to get rid of Lavrenti Pavlovich, it was Serov, as the man who knew all the inner workings of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who played an important role in his isolation. He participated in the search of Beria's office and dacha, seizing documents that could compromise the new leadership. His loyalty was rewarded. In March 1954, a new structure was created, the Committee for State Security, KGB, under the Council of Ministers of the USSR. And Ivan Alexandrovich Serov was appointed its first chairman. Khrushchev put his trusted, loyal man in a key position. As head of the KGB, Serov found himself in an ambiguous position. On the one hand, he was the embodiment of Stalin's system of repression. On the other hand, he had to implement the new policy of thaw and de-Stalinization. It was he, one of the organizers of the deportations, who now signed the documents rehabilitating the victims of those same deportations. On the 19th of March 1954, just a few days after his appointment, he, together with Prosecutor General Rudenko and other leaders, sent a note to the Presidium of the Central Committee on the need for a mass review of the cases of those convicted of counter-revolutionary crimes. It was a paradox. The system was beginning to devour its own past, and Serov was an instrument of this process. However, old habits and methods did not disappear. When the uprising broke out in Hungary in the autumn of 1956, Khrushchev sent two of his most trusted men there, Marshal Zhukov for military suppression and General Serov for special measures. Serov arrived in Budapest under the guise of an advisor. He personally participated in negotiations with the Hungarian military leadership, in particular with Defense Minister Pál Maleta. When the Hungarian delegation arrived at the Soviet command to discuss the withdrawal of troops, they were all arrested right in the negotiating room. Serov led this operation. It was a classic Chekist tactic: deception, treachery, and a stab in the back. After suppressing the uprising, Serov launched a large-scale purge in Hungary. He created new state security agencies, recruited agents, and oversaw the arrests and interrogations of rebel leaders. Imre Nagy, the head of the Hungarian government who had taken refuge in the Yugoslav embassy, was tricked out of there under guarantees of safety and immediately arrested by Serov's men. He was later executed. Serov acted in Budapest as coolly and effectively as he had once done in Lviv and Grozny. For this operation, according to some sources, he received the Order of Kutuzov, First Class, a military award for a brilliantly executed operation. Only this time the enemy was not the Wehrmacht soldiers, but Hungarian workers and students. In 1957, clouds gathered over Khrushchev once again. The old guard, Molotov, Malenkov, Kaganovich, attempted to remove him at a meeting of the Presidium of the Central Committee. Khrushchev found himself in the minority. His fate hung in the balance. Once again, his loyal security forces played a key role. Defense Minister Zhukov organized the emergency delivery of Central Committee members to Moscow on military planes to convene a plenum that would support Khrushchev. And Ivan Serov, head of the KGB, ensured an information blockade of the conspirators and control over the situation in the capital. He personally reported to Khrushchev on the movements and plans of his opponents. Serov's loyalty helped Khrushchev remain in power. Serov's position seemed unshakable. But the wheel of fortune in Soviet politics turned quickly. Having consolidated his power, Khrushchev began to get rid of those who knew too much and wielded too much power. Marshal Zhukov was the first to fall. Then it was Serov's turn. At the end of 1958, he was transferred from his position as head of the all-powerful KGB to the post of Chief of the Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU, of the General Staff. Formally, this was a high appointment, but in reality, it was an honorable exile. The GRU was involved in military intelligence, but did not have the same influence on domestic politics as the KGB. The final, crushing blow to Serov's career was dealt by the case of GRU Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, who turned out to be a double agent working for British and American intelligence. Penkovsky was arrested in 1962 after Serov had already left the GRU, but the shadow of this failure fell on Serov. Khrushchev used this pretext to finally get rid of his former comrade in arms. In 1963, Ivan Serov was demoted from Army General to Major General, stripped of his title of Hero of the Soviet Union, awarded in 1945 for exemplary performance of command tasks, and expelled from the party. That was the end. For a man of his generation and status, expulsion from the CPSU was tantamount to civil death. He spent the last decades of his life in obscurity. His name disappeared from the official chronicles. He lived on a modest pension in his flat, occasionally meeting with old colleagues. He wrote his memoirs, trying to justify his actions and explain the logic of the era in which he lived and worked. These notes, found and published only many years after his death, were an attempt by a man accustomed to commanding to come to terms with history. Ivan Alexandrovich Serov died on the 1st of July 1990, just a year before the collapse of the country he had served faithfully, as he understood it. He was buried without military honors. The shadow of two leaders, a man whose name was once whispered on both sides of the Iron Curtain, passed away almost unnoticed. His biography is a mirror of the era, An era where loyalty to the leader was valued above human life, where the state interest justified any crime, and where efficiency was the main measure of success. Serov was neither a sadist nor a maniac. He was a product of the system, a cold, calculating, and incredibly efficient functionary. A cog in a giant machine of oppression who managed to rise to the levers of control of that machine. He was the perfect executor, and that is what made him truly dangerous. Serov's rural childhood left an indelible mark on him, which he carried throughout his life, hiding it under his general's uniform. He possessed a peasant's grasp, thoroughness, and that specific cunning that allows one to survive in any conditions. He was not an intellectual or a theorist like many of the old Bolsheviks whom he later sent to the camps. His mind was practical and instrumental. He saw the task at hand and sought the shortest and most effective way to accomplish it, without burdening himself with moral reflections. This straightforwardness, bordering on primitivism in his assessment of complex political processes, made him the ideal executor for Stalin and later for Khrushchev. Both leaders valued not his depth of thought, but his ability to guarantee results. At the Frunze Academy, he stood out not for his brilliant knowledge of military theory, but for his phenomenal diligence and ability to memorize vast amounts of information. He could reproduce a lecture or order word for word, which was highly valued in the army. Teachers noted his iron ass, his ability to sit for hours poring over maps and diagrams. It was there, within the walls of the academy, that he learned the main principle that became his credo. Orders are not to be discussed, but carried out, at any cost. This principle freed him from personal responsibility, shifting it to those who gave the orders. After dry, ascetic Moscow, the Ukrainian capital was striking with its abundance, southern color, and completely different political atmosphere. Here, the national question was much more acute than in central Russia. Serov had to quickly learn to understand the intricacies of Ukrainian nationalism in its various forms, from moderate to radical. He personally studied the archives of Petliura's counterintelligence and the interrogation reports of OUN members. This was his baptism of fire in big politics, where the enemy was not only external, but also internal, often speaking the same language. His alliance with Khrushchev was not just a career move, but a kind of psychological synergy. Khrushchev, himself a man of action, valued Serov's lack of pretension and willingness to work hard. Their working meetings often took place not in formal offices, but over a map in a staff car, or directly in the field. Khrushchev could call Serov in the middle of the night and demand that he come immediately to resolve an urgent matter. Serov was always ready. He was Khrushchev's shadow, his strong arm. When Khrushchev needed to put pressure on a stubborn regional secretary or factory director, he often brought the silent People's Commissar of Internal Affairs into the conversation. Serov's presence had a magical effect on his interlocutors. Their words became more weighty and their objections quieter. For Serov, the purge of Western Ukraine was not just a repressive action, but a large-scale engineering project to change the social structure of the region. He approached it as if he were building a dam. Everything that got in the way had to be removed: boulders, snags, unstable soil. The boulders were Polish officers and officials, the snags were Ukrainian nationalists, and the soil was wealthy peasants and the urban intelligentsia. Serov personally developed instructions for carrying out arrests and deportations, which specified everything in detail: the start time of the operation, usually 4 to 5 a.m., the composition of the task force, the number of vehicles, the luggage allowance for those being deported, no more than 100 kilograms per family, and the procedure for sealing property. He thought in terms of trains, thousands of tons, and man-kilometers. During the war, his role often went beyond his direct responsibilities. In Stalingrad, where he was sent in the autumn of 1942, Serov was responsible not only for combating spies and panic-mongers, but also for organizing barrier detachments. He personally inspected positions on the front line, checking how Order number 227, not a step back, was being carried out. There is evidence of how he, a short, stocky general in a sheepskin coat, walked around the trenches under heavy enemy fire, giving short, sharp orders. His composure had an effect on the soldiers and commanders. He was the embodiment of the inevitable will of the High Command, which had come to restore order. In besieged Leningrad, he faced a different task: combating hunger and its consequences, including looting, banditry, and even cannibalism. The NKVD's operational reports from that period read like a horror novel. Serov acted in his usual manner: public executions of looters, raids, strict control over food distribution. At the same time, his department was involved in organizing the Road of Life across Lake Ladoga, providing protection for transport convoys from saboteurs and air raids. He was a man who could sign an order to shoot dozens of people for stealing bread ration cards one day and organize the evacuation of hundreds of children from a besieged city the next. In his mind, these actions did not contradict each other, but served the same purpose: the survival of the state. After the war, in Germany, Serov proved himself not only as a technology hunter, but also as a skilled schemer. He had to compete not only with Western intelligence agencies, but also with other Soviet departments, the army and various ministries, which also wanted to get their hands on German equipment and specialists. Serov acted preemptively. His task forces were the first to arrive at the sites, often under the guise of army commandants, sealing everything and taking away the most valuable items. This led to constant conflicts with the military, even with Marshal Zhukov himself. But Serov could always refer to a direct order from Moscow, from Beria, or even from Stalin himself, and this was an argument that even the Marshal of Victory could not refute. As chairman of the KGB, he tried to reform the agency to make it more modern. He understood that the days of mass terror were over and that more subtle methods of work were now needed. Under him, foreign intelligence and analytical units underwent significant development. He demanded that residents abroad not only obtain secrets, but also provide in-depth analysis of the political and economic situation in their host countries. He personally oversaw the most important operations, such as the recruitment of high-ranking officials in Western special services. At the same time, his old instincts did not fail him. During Khrushchev and Bulganin's visit to England in 1956, Serov, who was responsible for the delegation's security, became the hero of a high-profile scandal. The British press, having dug up his past involvement in deportations, dubbed him the Butcher and Ivan the Terrible. This sparked a wave of protests. Serov, however, remained unperturbed. He personally checked the routes and inspected the premises where the meetings were to take place, suspecting the British of preparing provocations. His pronounced distrust and constant presence alongside Soviet leaders irritated the British side, but Khrushchev felt as if he were behind a stone wall under Serov's protection. Serov's downfall was not only due to the Penkovsky affair. By the early 1960s, he had become too burdensome and inconvenient for Khrushchev. He was a living reminder of the Stalinist past, of those deeds that Khrushchev, exposing the cult of personality, would like to erase from his own biography. Serov knew too much. about Khrushchev's role in the Ukrainian repressions, about the details of the suppression of the Hungarian uprising, about the behind-the-scenes struggle for power in 1957. While Khrushchev was weak, he needed people like Serov. When he grew stronger, they became dangerous. The deprivation of the title of Hero of the Soviet Union was the most terrible blow for him. This award, received in May 1945, was for him a symbol of recognition of his merits in the victory. The official wording of the deprivation, for dulling political vigilance and an unworthy reaction to the facts of Penkovsky's betrayal, was only a formal pretext. In reality, it was an act of political humiliation, a signal to everyone that Serov had been permanently removed from the elite. During his years of disgrace, he became invisible. His name was erased from many official publications. During his years of disgrace, he became invisible. His name was erased from many official publications. If he was mentioned in the memoirs of military leaders, it was only in passing, without any indication of his positions. He tried to fight back, writing letters to Brezhnev and the Party Control Committee, arguing that the Penkovsky case had been uncovered after he left the GRU and that he bore no direct responsibility for it. But his letters went unanswered. The system he himself had built worked flawlessly. A person who fell into disgrace ceased to exist in the information field. An interesting detail about his character: despite his reputation as an executioner, in his private life, Serov was a rather sentimental man. He loved his family and adored his only daughter, Svetlana. Many entries in his published diaries are devoted to her, her studies, and her marriage. He writes proudly about her successes. This contrast between a ruthless functionary who sent thousands to their deaths and into exile and a caring father is striking. Perhaps this was his psychological defense, a way of maintaining inner balance by separating work from life. He collected weapons and was fond of hunting and fishing, typical hobbies of the Soviet nomenclature. But even here, his nature manifested itself. He approached these pursuits with pedantic thoroughness, studying the habits of animals and fish and carefully preparing his equipment. One of the lesser-known but telling episodes of his career is connected with the Katyn affair. When the Germans discovered mass graves of Polish officers in 1943, Serov, as one of the leaders of the NKVD, took part in developing the Soviet counter-propaganda version, which blamed the Nazis for the shootings. He was one of those who prepared materials for the Burdenko Commission, which was supposed to prove the guilt of the Germans. He personally interrogated witnesses and prepared them to give the necessary testimony. It was a job that required not brute force, but sophisticated cynicism and the ability to create a false reality. He was a master of such operations, where truth and lies were woven into a tight knot that could not be untangled for decades. His relationship with his subordinates was complicated. He did not tolerate sloppiness and amateurism and could be harsh and even rude. The slightest offense was followed by immediate reprimand. However, those who showed diligence and professionalism could count on his patronage. He created his own team in the KGB, promoting people he personally trusted to key positions. Many of them, like him, came from an army background. Serov believed that military discipline and a habit of unquestioning obedience were the best qualities for a Chekist. He disliked intellectuals in the security services, considering them prone to doubt and reflection, which interfered with the work. A typical example is the story of his visit to London in 1956. British counterintelligence MI5 kept him under round-the-clock surveillance. In the reports of British agents, Serov appears as an extremely suspicious and cautious man. He constantly changed routes, never walked alone, and, according to rumors, slept with a pistol under his pillow in his hotel room. He suspected that his room was bugged and conducted all important conversations on the street while walking. The British were struck by his professionalism and the aura of danger that surrounded him. He was not like a typical Soviet official. He had the hardened air of an operative who had been through fire and water. After Khrushchev's removal in 1964, Serov had a faint hope of rehabilitation. He wrote letters to the new leadership, offering his services as a consultant. But Brezhnev and his entourage did not want to have anything to do with him. For them, he was a man of the Khrushchev era, too closely associated with the former leader. In addition, the new KGB leadership, headed by Semichastny and then Andropov, was building a new image for the agency, the shield and sword of the party with clean hands, and Serov, with his history of deportations and political murders, was not a good fit. His office in Lubyanka was Spartan, contrasting with the lavish interiors of the Stalin era. On the table were only a few telephones, including a rotary dial phone and a neat stack of folders. He did not tolerate unnecessary paperwork and demanded that his subordinates report briefly and to the point, using facts rather than assumptions. This manner stemmed from his army past, but in the KGB it took on a special meaning. Behind every fact was a human destiny, and Serov preferred not to delve into emotional details. He worked with material, whether it was an agent's report, a deportation plan, or a list of candidates for arrest. His approach to working with agents was interesting. Unlike many old-school Chekists who relied on crude blackmail and threats, Serov was a proponent of more subtle recruitment based on psychology. He personally studied the cases of potential agents, looking for their weaknesses: vanity, financial difficulties, secret vices. In conversations with them, he knew how to be both a tough investigator and an almost fatherly mentor, convincing them that cooperation with the authorities was not treason, but the highest form of patriotism. This was particularly evident in his work with representatives of the Russian immigration after the war. He managed to convince many of them, who were longing for their homeland, to return to the USSR, promising forgiveness and a new life. The fate of most of these returnees turned out to be tragic, but for Serov, it was just a successfully completed operational combination. His trips abroad were always carefully planned. Before visiting England, he spent hours studying files on members of the British government, their habits, connections, and possible vulnerabilities. He demanded detailed plans of the buildings where the negotiations would take place, security layouts, and even the menus for upcoming dinners from the residency. This meticulousness bordered on paranoia, but it was precisely this that allowed him to anticipate possible provocations. In London, he astonished the British by refusing the car they offered him and traveling exclusively in a Soviet embassy car driven by a trusted KGB officer. One of the darkest spots on his reputation, apart from the deportations, is his alleged role in the liquidation of Stepan Bandera. One of the darkest spots on his reputation, apart from the deportations, is his alleged role in the liquidation of Stepan Bandera. Although the order was given after Serov left the KGB, it was under him that the 13th laboratory, specializing in poisons and methods of secret killings, was created and perfected. He personally oversaw the development of special weapons, such as a pistol that fired ampules of potassium cyanide, the very weapon used to kill Bandera. Serov laid the methodological and technical foundation for such wet jobs, turning them from isolated incidents into systematic practice. His attitude towards art and culture was purely utilitarian. He was not ignorant, but he viewed writers, artists, and actors primarily as instruments of ideological influence or potential sources of problems. During the thaw, he personally read manuscripts that raised doubts among the censors, and his resolutions were often final. The image of Serov as the most dangerous man in the USSR is a journalistic metaphor, but his biography confirms that he was a master of covert operations and political influence. From a peasant's son to the head of the KGB and a key figure under two leaders, his path left a mark on the country's history.